Welcome, you're watching the interview on France 24. We're here in Davos, where the world's business community gathers every year for the World Economic Forum. And today I'm pleased to welcome Joseph Stiglitz, a professor in economics at Columbia University and Nobel Prize laureate. Thank you for joining us on France 24. Let's begin with the latest growth figures from the U.S. economy. A first snapshot of GDP in the fourth quarter, which showed that the U.S. economy actually shrank by 3.8% in the fourth quarter. That's the biggest contraction in a quarter century. Mr. Stiglitz, have you been surprised by the number and the magnitude of the crisis?
Not at all. Not at all that the GDP number was as low, given the magnitude of job loss that has occurred in the last couple of months. But also not surprised, the evolution of this recession has been pretty clear. A couple of episodes that were not perfectly expected, the Lehman Brothers, but pretty much this is on track. We had a bubble, the bubble broke, and we're now seeing the fallout of that.
The numbers were actually, well, not as bad as some economists had predicted, because there was apparently a slight build-up in inventories, but this actually bodes ill for the future quarters. And also the hundreds of thousands of recent job cuts that we've seen in the past weeks, of course, are not taken into account into these numbers. So how will 2009 look like, according to you?
Gloomy. And that's the mood very much here in Davos, that you talk to business people making the decisions, their view of the future is dismal. And even those who have a rosier picture, their view of whether they can get access to credit is dismal. So on both accounts, things don't look good. And then again, there's the dynamic. Job losses mean people can't buy as much. The fact they can't buy as much means that they will production will become more job losses. It's a downward spiral.
On the other hand, the crisis was prompted by the excess of credit and spending, so which was also the source of the twin deficit and the global imbalances in the world economy. So can't we find some comfort in the fact that this crisis will probably force consumers to rein in spending and maybe save a bit more?
For the long run, it is good for the United States. I mean, obviously, we are on an unsustainable path where our savings rate, household savings rate, was down to zero. That's not sustainable. The problem is that what is going to replace the almighty American consumer in sustaining the American economy and the global economy? Underlying part of the problem is that we've had an increase in inequality, very serious. We've transferred money from people who would have spent it to people who are very wealthy. We managed our way through this problem by lending money to the poor people and to the average American. But that was a model that was flawed from the beginning, and now it's broken.
Is there anything the government can do to slow the pace of layoffs?
Well, slowing the pace of layoffs is going to be difficult, but what is needed to be done is stimulate the economy and fix the financial system. But the financial system won't be able to be fixed unless we deal with the root cause of the problem, which is the hemorrhaging, the flood of foreclosures. Millions of Americans have lost their home and with that their life savings, and nothing has been done effectively on any of these accounts so far.
And do you think that the economic stimulus package that was adopted by the House of Representatives last week will address these issues, this $819 billion plan for the economy?
It is doing nothing about the mortgages. It is doing nothing about restructuring the financial system. That's off on another side. Still don't know where that's going. It is not a well-designed program. It has about a third of the magnitude going into tax cuts, mostly for consumers. We know what will probably happen to that. With Americans overburdened by debt, facing uncertainty, backing all these other problems, they're not going to go run out and spend it. That's part of the good news. But the bad news is they're not going to go out and spend it. And that means it won't rejuvenate the economy as much.
But tax cuts are supposed to have the swiftest impact on growth, as opposed to government spending on infrastructure, for instance, which usually takes more time to have effect on growth.
It depends on the economic situation. And the economic situation right now is one where, given the burden of debt, they're not likely to respond, and they didn't respond last February when we had a tax cut. If you give money to the unemployed, that has an immediate effect, because if you don't give that money, they have to contract their expenditure. And if you give some money to the very poor who are struggling to get along, they'll spend it. But across the board tax cut, much of it goes to upper middle income families, especially when we do it through the tax system. And you don't give a broad base transfer to everybody in our population. The poor tax system, only those who are better off are actually part of the tax system. So the net result of all of this is that a larger fraction of the money is going to go to people who aren't going to spend all of it. They're going to hoard some of the money, and as I say, for their own personal well-being, it's a good thing, but not for rekindling the economy.
So, do you think it will take yet another economic stimulus package to restore confidence in the economy and to jumpstart growth?
Well, I think it needs a better design package. I mean, for instance, one of the things that should have been done is that the states and localities are facing a major budget constraint. We have a law that says they have to limit their spending to their revenues. If their revenues go down, say by $150 billion, they have to cut their spending. So they're going to be firing workers. So what we should be doing is stopping that bleeding. We should give the states money so they don't have to fire the workers. Another example, our universities are in very bad shape. The private universities had endowments that provide the income. They've been diminished very greatly by the decrease in stock market values. They're cutting back. Hiring freezes, Harvard, many universities around the country. Well, the government should be helping these universities to maintain, our future depends on having a highly educated labor force and having advancement in technology, and these play a very important role. So those are the kinds of things where we could have a more effective stimulus package.
And many people say that there's actually no quick fix for the economy, not until the financial system is stabilized. Do you think this is the urgency? And people are talking about Tim Geithner, the new U.S. Treasury Secretary, right now crafting a new bailout plan for banks. Is it because the first $700 billion voted under his predecessor, Henry Paulson, just didn't work or weren't used the most effectively?
The first $350 billion has been spent, and that was used miserably. It didn't stimulate the economy, and the credit flows have not been restarted, and we got a very bad deal. So that means the likelihood that we will recover the amount that we've given is much lower than otherwise would have been. And this is a particular concern because the size of the national debt has grown so much, from $5.7 trillion when President Bush to over $10 billion today. So the net result of this is that there is consensus that something more has to be done. The question is what? And one of the things is we have to stop the problem of the foreclosures, do something about that. And that's not been included in what has been advanced so far, and wasn't at all in the Paulson plan. But the other fundamental problem is that we are probably going to be chasing good money after bad money. I mean, just think about it the following way. If we took $700 billion and we created a new institution, looking forward. The problem is we've been looking back, looking forward. At a 12-to-1 leverage ratio, very modest, that would have generated $8.4 trillion of new credit. So spending $700 billion, you can generate a lot of credit, but not in the way that we've done, and actually not in the way that I've heard so far in the proposals coming out of Washington.
What needs to be done then? Create a bad bank to take bad loans off the bank's balance sheets, or nationalize banks? Team Geithner so far has ruled out any nationalization.
The bad bank idea is a bad idea. It's a version of one of the earlier ideas that was trashed. The idea was called cash for trash, actually, where the government would give the banks money and that we would take all their lousy assets that no one would touch for the 10-foot pole. We have a new version. Rather than doing it one by one, we'll take a whole bundle of trash. And the government, in the U.S., government is often is involved in garbage disposal. It's going to be disposing the garbage from the financial sector now. Now, why you think that this will solve the problem? Not clear. If we give the banks really what these assets are worth, market value, these banks are bankrupt. And what we've created is a situation which is a recipe for disaster. We, the American taxpayer, have now put in most of the capital in the banks. The private sector is just a small portion. And yet we have no voice. That situation where you have a disparity between ownership, who's provided the money, and control, who's making the decision, is a recipe for disaster. And that's why you see what's been going on. We were pouring money into the banks. They were paying out dividends. They were paying out bonuses. They were acquiring other firms. They were not interested in the American economic recovery. These were the same guys who led us into the mess. No change in management, except in a few cases where it was so outrageous that no one, could tolerate it.
That needs to be done, a change in management. Well, thank you, Joseph Stiglitz, for being our guest today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Do stay with us on France 24.